Hey guys, welcome to JoCo Yo. Today's episode starts with a letter. It was written on July 10, 1920 from Goldsboro, North Carolina. It went out to suffragists across the state, women who've been organizing, petitioning, writing, speaking, and waiting for decades. The letter was short, but here's a part of what it said. Quote, "The time has come when we must all put our shoulder to the wheel and make one strong final effort to secure ratification of the federal suffrage amendment by our General Assembly when it meets in special session next month. Will you not spur your committee to activity so that we shall have an expression from every part of the state urging ratification? We especially request you to make a vigorous campaign for signatures to our resolution. Think ratification. Talk ratification, work for ratification, make North Carolina the perfect 36th. It was signed Gertrude Weil, President, Equal Suffrage Association of North Carolina. Now, among the people that received that letter documented in the state archives was someone in Smithfield. Our Smithfield. The one who sent it lived just across the Wayne County line. She spent 50 years trying to get North Carolina to do the right thing. She died 24 days after the state finally did, and almost nobody in Johnston County knows her name. Today we're going to fix that. Gertrude Weil was born in Goldsboro on December 11, 1879. She was the oldest daughter of immigrant Henry Weil, and she was the first Jewish woman to lead a statewide secular women's movement in North Carolina. Her family had come from Germany. Herman Weil left Germany in 1858 for America, living in Baltimore before settling in Wayne County of all places. He served in the Confederate Army prior to opening in 1865 H. Weil and Brothers General Store with his siblings. The store thrived. The family thrived. They became pillars of Goldsboro, founding the local Jewish congregation, building parks, supporting hospitals and schools. Gertrude was the family's oldest daughter and sent north for her education. In 1894, at age 15, she was sent to New York City to attend the Horace Mann High School at Teachers College. After high school came Smith College, where in 1901, Weil became North Carolina's first alumna of Smith College. At Smith, she encountered something she had not fully found in Goldsboro, a world in which women were taken seriously as thinkers, as activists, as people with political and economic claims on the world. By the time she graduated, Weil was an avowed suffragist, convinced that women's political disabilities lay at the root of a broad range of contemporary problems. She wanted to stay in New York, teach in the schools, live the life she had discovered up north. Her family said no, come home. She obeyed, she came home. And then she spent the next 70 years making Goldsboro and North Carolina very uncomfortable. Her decision to associate herself with a relatively radical social and political agenda at the time was unusual for a Southern woman and even more uncommon for a Southern Jewish person. Historically, Southern Jews had stayed away from political or social causes that challenged Southern norms for fear of anti-Semitic backlash. The fears are warranted. The Leo Frank case was still fresh. If you don't know, in 1913, a Jewish factory manager in Atlanta had been accused of murdering a young white employee, a charge that was certainly false, and convicted in a trial so corrupt that even the governor of Georgia commuted his sentence. A mob then kidnapped Frank from prison and lynched him. It is surprising to find that only 2 years after Frank's sensational murder, which hit all the national papers, a Jewish woman from North Carolina directed a bitterly contested and high-profile suffrage campaign. Weil was not naive about what she was doing. She understood the risk, as a woman, as a Jew, as a Southerner, challenging the social order that her own family had carefully navigated since arriving after the Civil War. She did it anyway. Her dedication to social reform was a unique product of her education, her family position, and the strength of her personal conviction. These factors enabled and inspired Gertrude Weil to stand beside her beliefs despite adverse public reaction. She founded the Goldsboro Equal Suffrage Association in 1914 and served as its first president. Goldsboro. By 1917, she was an officer in the North Carolina Equal Suffrage League. By 1919, she was its president. By 1920, she was running the most important political campaign in North Carolina women's history. From a desk in Raleigh, with a typewriter and a very long list of names. And this is where Johnston County comes directly into the story. By 1920, 35 states had ratified the 19th Amendment. One more was needed. The honor, or the burden, depending on how you looked at it, seemed likely to fall on either North Carolina or Tennessee. In the heat of the summer of 1920, North Carolina and Tennessee squared off, each waiting for the other to blink. Both legislatures were considering a groundbreaking bill that would give women the right to vote. Whichever passed at first would make history as the 36th and final state required to ratify. With the ratification deadline approaching, the headquarters of the North Carolina Equal Suffrage Association settled at 116 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh, just a few doors down from its nemesis, the States' Rights Defense League of North Carolina, trying to keep the Confederacy alive. From there, Gertrude Weil and her fellow suffragettes, encamped at wooden desks with typewriters, worked to convince the male legislature of the worth of the women's vote. That July 10th letter, the one that went to Smithfield, was part of that campaign. Weil was trying to generate a flood of petitions, signatures, and organized pressure from every corner of North Carolina. She needed the legislators to feel that the people wanted this. She needed every county to be heard. Now, Johnston County has been, or was, deeply Democratic. Its legislators were almost certainly opposed to ratification, the same reasons that drove opposition across the South. Now remember, the Democratic Party of the early 1900s is not the same Democratic Party of the 2000s. Well, they were opposed to ratification for the same reasons that drove opposition across the South: fear of black women voting, fear of federal interference with state control, fear of change. The same county that had stripped black men of the vote in 1898 and 1900 was not eager to extend the franchise further. The Smithfield Herald, which had published that notorious November 1898 editorial calling on white Johnstonians to redeem the state, was now run by Renee Bingham Lassiter, a woman of significant intellect and editorial independence who we will cover again in episodes here and there in JoCo Yo. Now, we don't know exactly who Weil was corresponding with in Smithfield. The archive records records a location but not the name. But someone here was organizing. Someone here signed the petition. We have documentation of it. Someone here was part of Gertrude Weil's statewide campaign to make North Carolina the 36th state. It didn't work. On August 11, 1920, 63 members of the North Carolina House of Representatives sent a telegram to the Tennessee state legislature telling them that North Carolina would not ratify that amendment. In a letter addressed to fellow North Carolina suffragists, Weil made plain her frustration. She said, "As you know, our fight for ratification by the North Carolina legislature is over. We were unsuccessful in our efforts. Our North Carolina men have refused to ratify." In closing, she called upon the women to hold together whatever local organization you have. We shall need it to carry out the work that lies before us. Tennessee ratified the amendment on August 18. Women gained the right to vote nationwide. In North Carolina, the state where Gertrude Weil has spent her life, rejected the amendment anyway, the next day, just to make clear where it stood. And here's the part of the story that stopped me when I found it. North Carolina finally ratified the 19th Amendment on May 6, 1971, 51 years after it passed. In a meaningless symbolic gesture, as historian William Powell put it, the amendment had been the law of the land since August 1920. This was the legislature acknowledging it, finally, half a century on. Oh, I guess women can't vote. It was another 51 years before the state of North Carolina symbolically endorsed the amendment. 24 days later, Gertrude Weil died at the age of 91, having lived just long enough to see her life's work finally come to a true and fitting conclusion. 24 days. She was born in 1879, had been fighting for this since 1914. She had watched her state reject the amendment in 1920 while the rest of the country moved on. She had kept organizing, kept working, kept showing up through the Depression, through World War II, through the Civil Rights Movement she also gave decades to. She was in her 80s when she funded a swimming pool for black residents of Goldsboro and then dove into it herself at the dedication ceremony to desegregate it. She was 91 years old when North Carolina finally said that she is worthy of the same rights that men had had from the beginning. She died 24 days later in the house she was born. Man, that is one of the most extraordinary timelines in North Carolina history I've ever heard of. The question this episode is really asking, the JoCo question is, what does it mean that someone was corresponding with Weil from Smithfield? Well, here's what I think it means. In 1920, in a county that had systematically excluded black voters for 20 years, that was overwhelmingly controlled by a Democratic Party that opposed suffrage, that was not a natural home for progressive organizing. Someone was paying attention. Someone had Gertrude Weil's address. Someone was trying. 4 years after Weil's campaign failed, Johnston County would elect Luma McClam as its first woman office holder. She won during the Republican wave of 1928, riding an unlikely tide, but she ran. She was on the ballot. Someone had to have imagined that was possible before it happened. You don't get from no women at all in office to woman on the ballot in 4 years without someone somewhere making the case that women belong in public life. That case was being made, county by county, petition by Gertrude Weil, sitting at a desk in Raleigh in the summer of 1920, typing letters to every person she could reach, including someone in Smithfield, North Carolina. Her affiliations ranged from the local women's club and Temple Sisterhood to state suffragist organizations and Jewish groups to the Art Society and the Literary and Historical Association. As the president of Smith College said in awarding her one of the first 4 Smith College medals in 1964, Weil's career of public service was so extensive that it is difficult to find in the state of North Carolina a cultural, charitable, welfare, civic, or educational organization with which her name has not been connected. She said, "It's so obvious that to treat people equally is the right thing to do." She spent 91 years saying it in a state that spent 51 of those years refusing to agree. Man, what an amazing person. And that's pretty much all. Until next time, y'all, be good.